A city's true power flowed beneath its streets, not from its throne. The real rulers of the medieval world were silent systems of water, waste, and whispers. While we remember kings and knights, these three hidden networks quietly orchestrated everything from public health to political stability. By the end of this, you will see history not as a tale of great men, but as a story of vital, invisible infrastructure. How did a kingdom manage to keep clean water flowing to thousands? And where did all the waste secretly go? What is the most surprising system you think a city truly cannot live without? The city's hydraulic heart beat with a rhythm all its own, a steady pulse measured in the clatter of wooden buckets and the murmur of morning gossip at the public fountain. This was far more than just a place to collect water. It was the central nervous system of urban life. The engineering that made it possible was a ghost of Roman genius, a legacy of aqueducts marching across the landscape, of lead pipes snaking beneath cobblestones, and vast cisterns storing precious rain. Keeping this water flowing was one of the most important jobs in the city, a duty entrusted to specialized guilds and watchful officials who understood that a blocked conduit could mean more than just thirst. It could mean economic collapse or uncontrollable fire. That clean, constant flow was the lifeblood of industry, turning the wheels of tanneries and filling the vast vats of breweries. It supplied public baths, a critical, if imperfect, line of defense against disease. And in a world built of wood and thatch, it was the only real weapon against a blaze that could consume entire neighborhoods overnight. Your place in this society was literally defined by your access to this resource. The wealthy enjoyed the ultimate luxury, private pipes that brought water directly into their homes, while the common folk invested hours of their day simply waiting in line. This entire intricate network, a marvel of human organization, was the ultimate sign of a civilized space. But this clean, life-giving system had a dark twin. For every bucket of fresh water drawn, another bucket of waste had to disappear. What happened to the water after it was used reveals a second, shadowy circulatory system working in the city's depths. This second circulatory system flowed in reverse, a shadowy twin to the clean water network. While one brought life in, the other carried death out. The narrow, winding alleys of a medieval city did not sleep peacefully. Under the cover of darkness, a different kind of workforce emerged. These were the Gong farmers and the rakers, men and women tasked with the most despised yet vital job in the kingdom, the nightly collection of human waste and refuse. Their work was governed by strict civic ordinances, their schedules and routes meticulously planned to minimize the inevitable stench and disruption. They were the unseen custodians of public health, operating in the hours when the rest of the city tried to ignore the grim reality of its own survival. The methods they used varied from the simple to the surprisingly complex. Most households relied on cesspits, deep holes dug near homes that needed regular, dangerous emptying. More advanced towns built underground conduits, primitive sewers that channeled waste directly into the nearest river, simply moving the problem downstream. The ultimate destination was always the same, designated dumping grounds outside the city walls, where waste was left to decompose or be scavenged by roaming animals. The consequences of this system failing were swift and brutal. A blocked conduit or an overwhelmed cesspit was more than a nuisance, it was a ticking clock. The overflow of filth contaminated wells, bred swarms of insects, and created a perfect breeding ground for disease. Outbreaks of cholera and dysentery were common, and the catastrophic arrival of the bubonic plague, the Black Death, was often linked to the breakdown of these fragile sanitation networks. A city's cleanliness was not a matter of aesthetics. It was the ultimate measure of its administrative competence and its very chances of survival. This endless, grueling cycle of collection and removal was the dirty secret that kept the metropolis breathing. And just as this physical filth was secretly circulated out, another, more invisible form of circulation moved information in. That same marketplace, buzzing with the commerce of goods, also traded in a far more volatile commodity, information. In the shadow of the Grand Cathedral and within the smoky confines of the Tavern, the city's third vital system pulsed with invisible energy. This was the Whisper Network, a human internet of gossip, news, and clandestine intelligence that moved faster than any royal courier. Before newspapers or public broadcasts, this was how a city learned, reacted, and survived. A minstrel's new ballad might carry coded news of a battle lost in a distant land. A merchant just arrived from a rival port might share a hushed warning of shifting trade routes over a cup of wine. In the quiet scriptorium of a monastery, a monk meticulously copying a text might also be penning a secret letter for a local lord. Every piece of information, from a grain shortage to a royal scandal, was a piece of power. Those who controlled its flow held immense influence. Rival nobles and city councils employed networks of spies and informants, ordinary people who listened in the streets and reported back, turning every conversation into a potential source of intelligence. This system was the kingdom's true nervous system. A single, well-placed whisper about an impending tax hike could empty a marketplace in hours, causing economic chaos. A rumor of a lord's weakness could embolden his enemies without a single soldier ever marching. Information became a weapon that could topple governments, all without a sword being drawn. But to truly understand how these three systems, water, waste, and whispers, wove together to form the fabric of medieval power, we need to step back and see the stage upon which this entire drama played out, the city itself. The walled city was a living creature, its stone skin stretched over a skeleton of needs and functions. Its form followed the relentless logic of survival. The central marketplace was its beating heart, the main streets its arteries, all designed with a hidden purpose. Those seemingly chaotic, winding lanes were not just random paths, they were carefully sloped to act as drainage channels, using gravity to pull rainwater and filth away from the center and toward the gutters that fed the rivers. The placement of every public well and fountain was a calculated decision, a node in the hydraulic network meant to serve the maximum number of people while remaining defensible. Even the city gates served a dual role. They were not just barriers against armies but filters for information. The gatekeepers who noted every incoming merchant and every nervous traveler were the first line in the city's intelligence network, their observations flowing directly to the authorities in the central town hall. This dense, vertical world of overhanging houses and narrow alleys forced an intimate coexistence. Your neighbor's waste problem became your health crisis in a matter of days. A fire in one wooden attic threatened 100 homes. This crushing proximity made the silent, efficient work of the water and waste systems not a municipal luxury, but the very glue holding society together. And at the very core of this urban organism, where the cathedral and the town hall stood side by side, was the ultimate symbol of this order, a physical declaration that spiritual and temporal power controlled the essential flows of life. The city's blueprint was a map of its hidden priorities. To understand how this creature was fed, we must trace the veins that brought it life, beginning with the forgotten aqueducts and ingenious wells that quenched a metropolis's thirst. Those great stone aqueducts marching across the landscape were a city's lifeline, but they were only the beginning of the story. inside the walls, the water entered a hidden, intricate web of conduits. Fashioned from hollowed-out logs, baked clay, or even lead, these pipes snaked beneath the cobblestones, an underground map of the city's priorities. Building and maintaining this network demanded more than just labor. It required a deep understanding of gravity and pressure, a science passed down from Roman engineers and refined by medieval craftsmen. This was not a project for a single person. It was a massive civic undertaking, paid for by the taxes of every citizen or through the generous patronage of a wealthy merchant seeking to secure his legacy. And the path the water took was a clear reflection of the social order. The castle, the monastery, and the central market always received the first and most reliable supply. The powerful drank without a second thought, while the common people gathered at the public fountains, their access to this basic resource limited by their station. Yet at those very fountains something powerful happened. As water splashed into buckets, so too did information. The fountain was a democratic space, a living newspaper where a servant might hear a rumor just as quickly as a noble's agent. This engineered flow was a masterpiece of human cooperation, a tangible promise from the rulers to the ruled. When that promise was broken by a collapsed pipe or a blocked channel, the entire city felt it. A dry fountain was not just an inconvenience, it was a direct challenge to the authority of those in charge, proving that political stability could evaporate as quickly as a puddle in the sun. But for all their genius, these man-made arteries could not quench a city's thirst alone. They were always supported by a more ancient, earth-bound source. While the grand aqueduct served the powerful, the true heartbeat of a neighborhood was its well. This simple stone circle was far more than a water source. It was the community's living room, its newsroom, and its most vital piece of shared infrastructure. Every bucket hauled up from the darkness represented a triumph of communal effort, for these wells were dug by hand, maintained by collective agreement, and protected by unwritten law. The water within was a shared trust, a common wealth that belonged to everyone and no one at the same time. Its quality was a daily worry, a fragile purity constantly threatened by the seepage from a nearby tannery or an improperly placed privy just a few yards away. Disputes over who could draw water, and when were not minor squabbles, they were conflicts that could tear a village apart for generations. In a world without taps, your right to this water defined your place in the social order. And in times of crisis, when castle gates were sealed against a besieging army, the security of a single, deep well within the walls meant the difference between holding out for months or surrendering in a matter of days. This is where the day began and ended, where friendships were forged over the heavy work of drawing water, and where the latest gossip was exchanged as buckets were filled. The water drawn from this well was the essence of daily life, used to cook the daily pottage, to clean homes and clothes, and most importantly, to brew the ale that was the era's staple drink, safer to consume than many contaminated water sources. Its profound importance echoed through folklore, where wells were often seen as portals to other worlds or as wishes waiting to be granted. But this life-giving source was only one side of a precarious balance. For every bucket of clean water drawn from the well, another bucket of waste had to be managed, a constant reminder that survival was a cycle of intake and expulsion. Beneath the cobblestones and bustling market squares lay a city's dark digestive tract, a labyrinth of brick-lined channels and earthen tunnels. This underworld was not designed to handle the full burden of human waste as modern sewers do, but instead served a more limited, vital purpose. It carried away relentless rainwater and the liquid refuse from tanneries, butcher shops, and street gutters, channeling this foul flow toward the nearest river. In cities with a Roman past, These channels were often glorious hand-me-downs, ancient aqueducts and drains repurposed for a grim new duty, their elegant stonework now stained with the city's effluent. For the vast majority of citizens, however, the real business of waste happened in the privacy of their own homes, or more accurately, just outside them. The humble cesspit was the era's universal solution, a deep, unlined hole dug near the foundation of a house. It was a simple, almost primitive technology, but its management was anything but simple. When a pit filled to the brim, a specialized and dreaded workforce was summoned under the cover of darkness. These were the night soil men, their very name a testament to their nocturnal labors. They arrived with carts, buckets, and shovels, tasked with the stomach-churning job of emptying the accumulated filth. The stench that rose from an open cesspit was so overpowering it was legally classified as a public nuisance, with strict civic ordinances decreeing this work could only happen while the city slept. The dangers they faced were constant and horrifying. A poorly supported wall could collapse, burying a worker in an instant. The buildup of methane gas could ignite with a single stray spark, causing a catastrophic explosion. And always there was the invisible threat of disease, a miasma of sickness that clung to the very air they breathed. Yet from this repulsive work emerged a surprising economic loop. The contents of these pits, the so-called night soil, were not merely discarded. They were a valuable commodity, rich in nutrients essential for farming. Cartloads of this human waste were sold and transported to the surrounding countryside, where farmers spread it over their fields to replenish the soil. The city's filth literally fed the countryside, which in turn grew the food that fed the city. This hidden, malodorous circulation was a masterclass in grim logistics, a cycle of renewal born from absolute necessity, proving that even a society's most unpleasant byproducts could be transformed into a source of life. The city's night belonged to the Gong farmer. Long after curfew bells had silenced the streets, these figures emerged from the shadows, their arrival heralded not by sound but by an overwhelming stench. Theirs was the most despised profession in the medieval world, yet the entire city's health depended on their grim labor. They were the human cogs in the waste removal machine, a specialized workforce of men and women legally bound to work only under the cover of darkness, their very presence considered a public nuisance in the light of day. Their lives were defined by their work, often forced to live on the remote outskirts of town and forbidden by sumptuary laws from wearing fine clothes or mingling in public markets. They were essential, yet they were made invisible. A Gong farmer's night began with the careful assembly of his tools, wooden buckets, long-handled shovels, and a covered cart. His team moved with a grim efficiency born of repetition, their work tightly scheduled by the city council. Each district had its assigned night, a rota designed to spare the delicate sensibilities of the sleeping populace from the constant reminder of the filth they collectively produced. The work itself was brutally physical and deeply hazardous. Lowering a bucket into a darkened cesspit was an act of faith, a gamble against collapsing walls and pockets of poisonous gas. One misplaced spark from a lantern could ignite a pocket of methane with catastrophic results. The stench was so potent it was thought to carry disease itself, a visible miasma that made the workers themselves pariahs. Yet from this repulsive labor emerged a strange and vital economy. The waste they collected, politely called night soil, was not simply discarded. It was a valuable commodity, rich in nitrogen and other nutrients. Cartloads of this human fertilizer were sold to farmers in the surrounding countryside, creating a circular economy where the city's waste literally fed the fields that grew the city's food. These workers formed a direct physical barrier against epidemic disease, removing the breeding grounds for plague and cholera with every shovelful. even as they faced the greatest risk of infection themselves. Their existence was a stark paradox, a living reminder that the clean, orderly world of the powerful was built upon the labor of the reviled. While these men and women managed the flow of physical refuse, another clandestine group navigated a far more volatile current, the constant stream of whispers and secrets that fueled the city after dark. In the quiet scriptorium, the scratch of a quill was the only sound that gave a whisper lasting power. The Scrivener, bent over his parchment in the flickering candlelight, was far more than a simple copyist. He was a trusted curator of the city's most sensitive information, a human vault for the secrets of both state and soul. His work drafting a merchant's contract, recording the minutes of a closed-door council meeting, or composing a private letter for a local lord placed him at a critical junction in the information network. He had to be literate, discreet, and above all, trustworthy, for the words he set down could start a war or secure a fortune. This formal, written record was the backbone of administration, the permanent memory of a kingdom that outlived any single king or councilman. But these fragile parchments were useless if they stayed in one place. They needed legs, and that is where the Courier entered the story. These men, often riding in pre-arranged relays with fresh horses stationed along major routes, formed the physical internet of the Middle Ages. A message could travel from London to York with astonishing speed, its carrier battling weather, bandits, and exhaustion to deliver a sealed packet that might contain news of a rebellion or the terms of a vital trade agreement. The security of this system was paramount. Letters were closed with a blob of wax impressed with a unique signet ring, a seal that proved the document's authenticity and promised severe punishment if broken by anyone other than the intended recipient. For the most sensitive communications, simple ciphers replaced plain text, turning a military order into an unreadable string of symbols to any prying eyes. The most powerful institutions invested heavily in this infrastructure. The papacy operated a courier network that stretched across Christendom, its messengers carrying papal bulls that could excommunicate emperors. In Venice, the heart of a maritime empire, a state-run galley service ensured that news from Alexandria or Constantinople reached the Doge's palace before his competitors even knew a ship had docked. This ability to project power and make decisions based on timely information was a strategic advantage that separated great kingdoms from minor fiefdoms. Yet for all its sophistication, this formal web of scribes and messengers was only the visible tip of a much larger, wilder, and infinitely more unpredictable information iceberg. A king's edict might be written on parchment, but it was truly made real in the smoky air of a crowded tavern. Here, in the flickering firelight, information shed its formal skin and became something raw, immediate, and wildly powerful. This was the nervous system's most vital synapse, a place where a traveler's offhand comment about poor harvests to the south could send a local merchant rushing to buy up all the grain by morning. The tavern keeper, pulling ale and listening to every conversation, was more than a business owner. He was an unofficial archivist of public sentiment, a node in a vast, informal intelligence network. His establishment was a listening post where the worries of the common people and the boasts of passing soldiers mixed into a potent brew. In the same way, the daily marketplace was a living, breathing news service. The official town crier might read a proclamation from the steps of the Guildhall, but its true meaning was debated and dissected seconds later among the stalls selling bread and cloth. A rumor that the price of wool was set to fall could spread from one end of the square to the other in the time it took to haggle over a chicken, causing a panic that official reassurances could never calm. This was the Whisper network made tangible, a force that could empty a treasury by inciting a run on the banks or fill a town square with an angry mob, all without a single written order. Authorities knew this, of course. They struggled to control the narrative in these chaotic spaces, sometimes planting their own agents to spread counter-rumors or paying innkeepers for detailed reports on their patrons' conversations. The information flowing through these social hubs was the lifeblood of the city, but it was also a double-edged sword. It could nourish the body politic with timely news, or it could carry the poison of misinformation, a tool not just of connection, but of deliberate control and suppression. A whisper could be a death sentence when it reached the wrong ears. For every merchant sharing news in a tavern, there was likely a paid informant listening in the shadows, taking mental notes for a local magistrate or a rival lord. Espionage was not the stuff of romantic legend. It was a grim professional trade. Lords and city councils maintained networks of agents who could blend into any crowd, their true allegiance known only to their paymaster. A humble pilgrim traveling the roads might be carrying coded messages sewn into his cloak. A servant in a rival noble's household could be bribed to report on private conversations heard through closed doors. The interception of a single letter could reveal military plans or expose a secret alliance, making the courier's journey a perilous gauntlet of potential ambushes and bribed innkeepers. But the most pervasive intelligence often came from within. The informant was not a shadowy figure from afar, but a neighbor, a business rival, or even a disgruntled family member. Motivated by a pouch of silver coins or by the fear of being accused themselves, these ordinary citizens provided authorities with a constant, chilling stream of local gossip. They reported on who was not attending church, who was complaining about new taxes, or who was meeting in secret after dark. This created a society steeped in low-grade paranoia, where trust was a dangerous gamble and a careless word spoken in confidence could lead to a midnight arrest. That fear was weaponized through institutions like the Inquisition, which formalized the process of interrogation and used the threat of torture to extract confessions and uncover heresy. The mere knowledge that this clandestine layer existed within the everyday Whisper network was itself a form of power. It discouraged open dissent and reinforced the authority of the state, proving that the flow of information was not just a natural current, it was a resource that could be dammed, diverted, or deliberately poisoned to maintain control. This manipulation of knowledge reveals the ultimate truth, that the silent systems of water, waste, and whispers were not just about survival. They were the essential tools for building and holding a kingdom together. A castle's deepest well was its most closely guarded secret, a fortress within a fortress. Control over water was the ultimate strategic advantage, a power as real as any army. A feudal lord did not just own the land, he owned the rivers that flowed through it and the springs that bubbled from it. He could grant water rights to a loyal miller, giving him a lucrative monopoly on grinding grain, or he could cut off a rebellious village, turning their fields to dust and their wells to mud. This was power in its most elemental form, the power to give or deny life itself. In times of war, this control turned overtly hostile. A besieging army's first move was often not to storm the walls, but to poison the surrounding wells with animal carcasses or to demolish the aqueducts miles away, silently strangling the city from a distance. The success of a siege hinged on this calculation, on who would run out of water first. A fortress with a protected internal spring, like the legendary well at Chateau Gaillard, could hold out for over a year, becoming a symbol of unbreakable defiance. For city councils, the public fountain was their stage. To keep it flowing with clean water was a visible, daily performance of good governance, a proof that their taxes were being put to proper use. They built ornate structures around these fountains, turning practical infrastructure into civic art, a declaration that their rule brought order and beauty. But this was a fragile contract. A fountain that ran dry or a well that turned foul was more than a failure of engineering, it was a failure of leadership. Such an event could shatter the public's trust instantly, transforming grumbling subjects into an angry mob at the city gates. The clear, flowing water was the physical proof of a social order that worked. And just as this life-giving flow could be dammed and directed for control, its dark mirror image, the relentless tide of waste, could be turned into a weapon of its own. The river did not smell the same for everyone. If you were wealthy, your home stood on the high ground, catching the clean breezes, your private garderobe neatly depositing its contents into the fast-moving current below. But if you were poor, you lived downstream, in the low-lying districts where every foul thing from the city above eventually settled. Your neighborhood was the city's sacrifice zone, the place where the tanneries cured hides in vats of urine and the slaughterhouses washed blood and offal into the gutters. The air itself was thick with the stench of an economy at work, a stench the powerful deemed a necessary evil. You breathed the consequences of a cleanliness you could not afford. This was the brutal geography of filth, a map of poverty written in odor and disease. The city's official rules often made this injustice worse. A poor household, fined for dumping a bucket of waste into the street, was being punished for a crime of proximity. They had no private courtyard, no garderobe chute, and the public latrine was a distant, overflowing horror. Meanwhile, the grand houses upstream faced no such penalties for their own, far greater, contributions to the river's pollution. This was not an accident, it was a system. The management of waste quietly reinforced the social ladder, reminding everyone of their place with every foul smell and overflowing gutter. Your experience of the city, the air you breathed, the water you risked drinking, the sickness your children endured was dictated by your status. And just as this physical filth was carefully channeled away from the powerful, the flow of precious information was also diverted to serve those at the top. A royal proclamation in the town square was a carefully orchestrated performance of power. The town crier, with his booming voice and official scroll, delivered the king's words to a largely illiterate populace. The crowd heard the sounds, but the true meaning, the subtle implications hidden within the legal phrasing, remained the exclusive property of the educated few standing nearby. For the common laborer or farmer, information was a passive experience, something received and interpreted for them, never truly owned. This control over the written word created a fundamental and deliberate inequality. While the merchant class might hire a scrivener to read a contract, and the nobility maintained private libraries, the peasant had no such recourse. Their world was built on oral tradition and hearsay, a reality that those in power expertly managed. Even the most sacred source of information, the Latin Mass, was a ritual conducted in a language deliberately kept separate from the common tongue. The priest acted as the sole interpreter between God and his flock, his sermons framing divine will in a way that reinforced the existing social order. To question your place in the world was to risk your place in the next. This systemic knowledge gap was the bedrock of medieval stability. Without the ability to independently verify a lord's claim to taxes or to read a charter outlining their ancient rights, communities found it nearly impossible to organize effective, large-scale resistance. Their grievances remained localized and fragmented, easily dismissed as the grumblings of the ignorant. The very whisper network that seemed so democratic was, in fact, dangerously porous to manipulation. A lord's agent could easily plant a rumor of a bountiful harvest in a neighboring region, triggering a mass exodus of desperate laborers and driving down local wages. The church could spread stories of divine punishment for dissent, using the fear of hellfire to quell unrest. The tools of control were not always swords and shields. They were often stories and lies, strategically deployed by the literate to manage the illiterate. The silent systems of water, waste, and whispers were not three separate threads, but a single, braided cord of power, each strand reinforcing the others to hold the entire structure of the kingdom firmly in place. These three systems were not separate gears, but a single, interlocking machine. A single broken conduit could trigger a cascade of failure. Without clean water, people turned to contaminated wells, and disease would surge through the population. This sudden outbreak would overwhelm the nightly waste collectors, leaving filth to accumulate in the streets and accelerating the spread of sickness. As plague took hold, the city gates would slam shut. Trade caravans halted, couriers were turned away, and the vital whisper network fell silent. In the resulting information vacuum, rumors of the catastrophe would spread, causing panic in neighboring towns and destabilizing the entire region's economy. The reverse was also true. A single whisper, a reliable report of an approaching army, would set a different chain of events in motion. The city council would immediately order the public fountains guarded and the cisterns filled to the brim, while merchants scrambled to stockpile grain. The entire rhythm of urban life, from the water carriers at dawn to the Gong farmers after dark, was a dance choreographed by the demands of this symbiotic triad. A city's government could boast of splendid new aqueducts, but if its spies were deaf or its streets choked with refuse, that success was meaningless. True stability depended on managing all three flows in perfect concert. This hidden equilibrium was the true engine of the medieval world, and to see it operating at its peak, we can look to a city that perfected this balance, the island republic of Venice. London's survival was a daily negotiation between order and chaos, nowhere more visible than along the banks of the Thames. In the bustling commercial heart of Cheapside, the great conduit stood as a marvel of civic engineering, a domed stone structure that collected fresh water from Tavern and distributed it to a thirsty populace. This was the city's official, public answer to its most basic need. Yet just a short distance away, the open sewer known as the Fleet Ditch carried a foul torrent of waste from tanneries, slaughterhouses, and privies down to the river, its stench a constant reminder of the city's other, darker circulatory system. The city's government, led by its mayor and aldermen, waged a perpetual war against this filth, passing ordinance after ordinance that tried to impose control. They mandated that householders sweep the refuse from the street in front of their doors. They licensed the water carriers who sold buckets of clean water from the conduit to those who could afford the price, and they built public latrines perched precariously over the fleet, attempting to centralize the problem. But these official efforts were always playing catch-up with the city's explosive growth. The very lanes that were supposed to be cleaned daily were also the same narrow, wooden-walled passages that would one day carry the Great Fire of 1666 with terrifying speed, a catastrophe born from the intimate coexistence of necessary infrastructure and profound vulnerability. While the aldermen managed the physical flows of water and waste, the city's political lifeblood pulsed elsewhere. At St. Paul's Cross, the official town crier delivered royal proclamations to the masses, a top-down stream of information. But just a few streets away, in taverns like the famed Mermaid Inn, a completely different kind of power was brewing. Here, in the smoky, crowded rooms, merchants, playwrights, and sailors traded gossip that could shift fortunes. A whispered rumor about a ship lost at sea could bankrupt an investor by morning. A satirical verse about the king's court, passed from table to table, could shape public opinion more effectively than any official decree. And moving through this landscape, invisible to most, were London's Gong farmers. They were a legally recognized guild, their work scheduled and regulated, yet they were forced to live on the margins, their essential labor making them permanent outcasts. London's spectacular rise as a European capital was not just a story of kings and commerce. It was the unglamorous triumph of this complex, interlocking web, a daily effort to keep the water flowing, the waste moving, and the whispers from boiling over into revolt. For every London that managed this balance, however, there were countless cities where the delicate equilibrium shattered completely. The plague arrived not with a bang, but with a whisper. A rumor from a distant port, a story of a fever that left black marks on the skin and killed within days. The very network that usually kept the city informed now pumped pure terror through its veins. With every new piece of hearsay, the collective mind fractured. Trust evaporated overnight. Neighbors began to view each other with suspicion, seeing not a friend, but a potential carrier of death. The priests and doctors, those traditional pillars of comfort and care, were often the first to fall, their roles placing them in constant, fatal contact with the sick. Their loss was a double blow, removing both the primary healers and the most trusted interpreters of this divine punishment, leaving a spiritual and informational void that panic rushed to fill. As the death toll mounted, the city's physical systems began to rot from the inside out. The nightly procession of Gong farmers, so vital to public health, simply stopped. The men who carted away the filth were dead or had fled into the countryside to save their own lives. The streets, once cleared under cover of darkness, became choked with refuse. Cesspits overflowed, their foul contents seeping into the soil and contaminating the groundwater. This putrid landscape created a perfect breeding ground for the real engines of the plague, the rats and the fleas they carried. The very waste meant to be expelled was now calling death directly to every doorstep. Meanwhile, the public fountains, once the vibrant centers of community life, fell silent and suspect. Was the water itself poisoned? Had the miasma of disease tainted the supply? This fear led to a cruel paradox. People, afraid to drink, became dehydrated, weakening their bodies and making them even more susceptible to the very sickness they sought to avoid. The lifeblood of the city was now seen as a potential poison, and this collective refusal of water crippled the population's resilience. The authorities, those who were left, found themselves utterly powerless. They could post guards to enforce quarantines, but the plague ignored their pikes and proclamations. They could order the streets cleaned, but there was no one left to carry the shovels. The entire social contract, the unspoken agreement that the rulers would maintain order in exchange for obedience, dissolved in the face of an enemy that respected no rank or title. The true legacy of the Black Death was not just the staggering loss of life, a demographic catastrophe that halved some communities. It was the profound psychological scar it left on the European mind. The world had proven to be terrifyingly fragile. The systems everyone had relied upon, the hidden rhythms of water, waste, and whispers that quietly ran the kingdom, had proven to be a house of cards in a storm. The event rewired society's understanding of safety, power, and community. It took generations for the population to recover, and for a new, more questioning world to emerge from the ashes of the old. This historical collapse forces a simple, haunting question. We no longer worry about Gong farmers or town criers, but what are the silent, essential systems that hold our own world together today? The same three silent systems pulse beneath our modern streets, transformed by technology but driven by the same ancient needs. The water flowing from your kitchen tap is the direct heir of the medieval conduit, now sourced from vast, engineered reservoirs and purified through chemical and biological processes far beyond the understanding of any Roman engineer. This clean, constant supply is a modern miracle we take for granted, yet it remains a fragile one. dependent on a hidden infrastructure of pumps, pipes, and treatment plants that demands constant vigilance and immense public investment. The waste you flush away vanishes into a subterranean labyrinth, a high-tech version of the Gong farmer's nightly route. Instead of a cart trundling toward a dumping ground, our sewage travels through miles of pressurized tunnels to advanced treatment facilities where its harmful components are neutralized, and in some cases, the water itself is reclaimed and returned to the cycle. This hidden process is our society's greatest triumph over the filth-borne diseases that once ravaged medieval populations, and our digital world, the internet with its social media platforms and relentless news cycles, is the ultimate global whisper network. It transmits information not at the speed of a horse or a sailing ship, but at the speed of light, connecting billions in a web of communication that makes the medieval tavern seem like a lonely outpost. Yet for all our technological prowess, we grapple with challenges that would feel hauntingly familiar to a medieval town council. The fight for equitable access to clean water continues in our own cities and across the globe. We struggle with the sustainable management of a new kind of waste, from plastic pollution to electronic debris, and we navigate the perils of digital misinformation and data control, modern echoes of the planted rumors and intercepted letters that once shaped kingdoms. The medieval city teaches us a profound and enduring lesson. The true health of any society, past or present, is not measured by its grand monuments, but by the resilience of its most fundamental, often invisible systems. Understanding this history does more than satisfy our curiosity. It makes us more informed citizens of our own complex world, allowing us to see the sheer human effort and ingenuity behind every drop of clean water, every ton of safely processed waste, and every byte of data that connects us. A master mason's name might be carved in stone, but the Gong farmer's was washed away with the night's filth. This stark division was the human engine of the medieval city, a vast and often brutal hierarchy of labor that kept the entire machine running. The clean water you drank arrived thanks to the genius of the hydraulic engineer, a man who understood gravity and stone, a respected artisan whose work was considered a near-divine craft. Yet the very conduit he designed required constant maintenance by a different class of worker entirely. These were the men who waded into the muck to clear blockages, the children sent into the tightest, darkest pipes, their small bodies a grim asset for a filthy job. Your value was not measured by your effort, but by the cleanliness of your task. The guildsman who forged the iron brackets for a new fountain was a pillar of the community, while the raker who swept the animal dung from the streets was legally forbidden from touching the food in the market. This was not an accident of economics, it was the foundation of the feudal world you made visible in daily life. Every person had a fixed place and a fixed duty, a concept reinforced by the very systems that sustained them. Women formed the invisible backbone of this entire structure. While men held the public, recorded jobs, it was women who managed the relentless daily cycle of water and waste within the household. They were the ones who hauled the water for cooking and cleaning, who disposed of the household's refuse, and who negotiated with neighbors over shared privies and contested gutter space. Their conversations at the well or the bakehouse wove the most resilient threads of the local whisper network, a flow of information that official chroniclers never saw fit to write down. The city's survival depended on this deeply ingrained social order, a contract of mutual obligation that was profoundly unequal. To question your station was to threaten the delicate balance that provided everyone with clean water and cleared streets. This reliance on a rigid hierarchy adds a difficult moral weight to the medieval city's achievements. The gleaming cathedral and the flowing fountain were monuments not just to faith and engineering, but to a social system built on the silent, sanctioned suffering of the unseen. Their labor was the true price of urban life, a cost recorded not in ledgers, but in the unmarked graves and forgotten names of those who did the work no one wanted to see. The true power of the medieval state was not written in epic poems, but in the dry, meticulous entries of a town ledger. These civic records reveal a hidden world of administration, a sophisticated body of law dedicated to taming the chaotic forces of water, waste, and whispers. A city council did not just debate grand politics, it passed ordinances dictating the precise width of a street, not for parades, but to ensure the Gong farmer's cart could make its nightly rounds. They set heavy fines for a butcher who dumped offal into a public waterway, recognizing that one man's convenience could poison a community's well. They even established official guilds to regulate the water carriers, turning the chaotic daily scramble for water into a licensed, monitored profession. This was governance in its most granular form. The most common source of litigation was not land, but water rights. Courts were constantly adjudicating disputes between two neighbors over a diverted gutter, or between entire towns arguing over who had the right to dam a shared river. Every blocked conduit and every flooded cellar became a matter for the law, because the authorities understood that a dispute over water could escalate into a violent feud if left unresolved. And just as they managed the physical flow, they tried to control the flow of information. Laws against slander and sedition were the blunt instruments used to curb the destructive power of the whisper network, while the official town crier, paid from the public purse, was the approved alternative, a human loudspeaker for the official narrative. This sprawling body of administrative law represents a profound realization. A kingdom could not be run on a king's charisma or a knight's battle prowess alone. It required meticulous, boring, and continuous bureaucratic management. The tax records that paid for a new conduit, the court rolls that settled a water dispute, the guild regulations that ensured a fair price for a bucket of water, these were the unglamorous gears of power. A city's prosperity and stability were not accidents. They were the direct result of this administrative competence. The design of the city itself, from the slope of its streets to the placement of its fountains, was the ultimate physical expression of this bureaucratic will, a landscape shaped by law to ensure the silent systems never failed. Every stone in the city was a choice. The soaring height of a cathedral spire was not just a reach toward heaven. It was a landmark visible for miles, a fixed point for travelers, and a silent declaration that this was a center of spiritual and earthly power. The castle keep, that final fortress within a fortress, was always built around its deepest, most protected well, making the control of water the literal foundation of military might. Even the serene cloisters of a monastery hid a mastery of practical engineering, with sophisticated plumbing systems that channeled fresh water to fountains for ritual washing and clever drains that carried waste away from the living quarters, ensuring a purity that was both physical and spiritual. The layout of the entire city was a physical response to the triad of needs. Major streets were deliberately widened to lead to the central marketplace and the town hall, creating natural stages for the town crier and ensuring that official proclamations reached the largest possible audience. This was urban planning as information technology, yet the very same design that facilitated control also created profound vulnerabilities. The common practice of building houses with each successive story projecting out over the street was a clever way to maximize precious interior space, but it turned the lanes below into dark, narrow canyons. These cramped passages choked the flow of air, made the nightly work of the rakers and Gong farmers a logistical nightmare, and created a perfect tinderbox that could turn a single cooking fire into a city-wide inferno. Bridges were another critical architectural fulcrum. A stone bridge across a river was more than a convenience. It was a fortified choke point where authorities could monitor and tax every cart, every merchant, and every piece of news entering or leaving the city. The flow of goods, people, and information was literally funneled through a single, easily controlled archway. From the gentle slope of a cobbled street, designed to guide rainwater and waste toward a central gutter, to the strategic placement of a city gate to catch the prevailing winds and blow smoke and stench away from wealthy districts, every architectural decision was a calculated move in the endless game of managing the city's silent systems. This intricate urban machine, however, did not operate in a vacuum. Its very design was a constant, silent negotiation with the natural world it sought to control. A river was the city's first and most important reason for being. It was not a scenic backdrop but a multi-purpose engine, a tool for survival that the medieval planner used for everything at once. The same current that turned the great wooden wheels of the grain mill also carried away the waste from the tannery just upstream, while serving as the main highway for barges laden with stone and timber. This was a relationship of brutal utility, a constant negotiation that often pushed the river beyond its limits. You can almost map the city's priorities along its banks. The clean water for drinking was drawn from the upstream side, where the flow was still fresh from the countryside. Further down, the docks and mills churned the water into a froth of industry. And by the time the river slid past the poorest, lowest-lying districts, it was a sluggish, foul-smelling soup of the city's collective effluent. The land itself dictated the flow of life and filth. Gravity was the unseen city planner, ensuring that every street was a subtle drainage channel and that every hardship flowed downhill. The wealthy built their homes on the high ground where the air was clearer and the wells were less likely to be tainted. The poor crowded into the low-lying areas, the city's sacrifice zones, where every storm flooded cellars with a contaminated mix of street runoff and sewage. This was not a choice but a topographical sentence. Climate was the unpredictable variable in this delicate balance. A long, hard winter was a silent crisis. It froze the aqueducts and public fountains solid, forcing people to melt dirty snow for water and bringing commerce to a standstill. Then came the spring thaw, which could be even worse. The sudden deluge of meltwater would overwhelm the drainage channels, flooding cesspits and sweeping their contents into the streets and wells, triggering the predictable and deadly outbreaks of disease. The city was not a conqueror of nature, but a tenant in a system it only partially understood. Its sustainability had a hard limit, visible in the fouled rivers and the plague-ridden slums. This ancient struggle echoes in our own time. We may have replaced rivers with complex water grids and cesspits with treatment plants, but we are still negotiating that same fragile truce with the natural world, still learning that a city's true strength lies not in dominating its environment, but in learning to live within its means. The engineering has changed, but the human need remains the same. Our modern water treatment plant, with its vast concrete basins and complex chemical processes, is the direct descendant of the medieval conduit. It fulfills the same ancient promise to deliver a safe, constant supply of water, but on a scale a Roman engineer could scarcely dream of. That rumbling sanitation truck that empties your bin each week performs the same essential service as the Gong farmer's cart, a nightly ritual of removal that is the bedrock of public health. And the fiber optic cable humming with invisible data is our global town crier, connecting us to information and to each other at the speed of light. We are still solving the same three fundamental problems: thirst, disease, and isolation. The medieval world did not solve them perfectly, but it established a critical principle. It decided that providing these basic services was not a private luxury, but a core function of a legitimate government. the tax records that funded a new aqueduct, the legal disputes over water rights, the civic ordinances that scheduled the waste collectors. These were the clumsy, early blueprints for the modern welfare state. Our unspoken expectation that our city will provide clean water at the turn of a tap, that our waste will vanish with the flush of a toilet, and that we will be connected to a global network of information is not a modern invention. It is a direct inheritance from the crowded, inventive, and often desperate urban experiments of the Middle Ages. To understand this lineage is to see our own world with new eyes. We begin to notice the invisible architecture of our civilization, the vast and silent systems working just beneath the surface of our daily lives. This long historical journey reveals a profound and simple truth. Real power, the kind that builds and holds a civilization together, has never been about the crown on a king's head. It has always been about the water in the pipes, the waste in the trucks, and the whispers on the wire. The true foundations of a kingdom were never truly laid in throne rooms or on battlefields. Power was engineered in the steady flow of clean water, the relentless nightly removal of waste, and the constant subterranean hum of information. While kings and queens provided the grand drama, it was the aqueducts, the sewers, and the whispers that provided the essential, unglamorous stability. This history shatters our romanticized vision of knights and chivalry, replacing it with a grittier, more complex, and ultimately far more fascinating reality. It teaches us that civilization is not a grand castle on a hill, but a delicate, living construct. Its survival hinges entirely on the efficient, continuous management of the most mundane necessities. The next time you effortlessly turn on a tap, flush a toilet, or check a news alert on your phone, remember the medieval origins of these simple acts. You are witnessing the modern evolution of those same three silent systems, the hidden networks that make contemporary life not just comfortable but possible at all. Which of these three foundational systems do you find most fascinating, the water, the waste, or the whispers? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this journey into the hidden workings of history captivated you, I invite you to subscribe for more deep dives into the forgotten past that silently shaped our present world. That careful scrape of the trowel against ancient wood is more than just archaeology. It is a conversation with the past. These material remains, unearthed from the mud of cities like York and London, are the silent witnesses that confirm our stories. We can read about monastic plumbing in a ledger, but it is another thing entirely to stand in the excavated foundations and trace the path of a clay pipe with your own eyes. These physical fragments transform abstract history into tangible truth. A soil sample, analyzed under a modern microscope, tells a vivid story of daily life. The chemical signature of concentrated human waste reveals the exact location of a long-vanished latrine. High levels of lead and copper in the earth might trace the outflow from a forgotten metalworking district, mapping the city's industrial heartbeat through its pollution. Even the subtle layering of soil, the stratigraphy, acts as a timeline. A thick, dark layer of organic refuse sandwiched between cleaner soil can mark the catastrophic moment a plague-stricken neighborhood's waste collection simply stopped, a grim echo of the societal collapse we discussed. These are not just artifacts, they are forensic evidence. The layout of property boundaries preserved for centuries in maps and land charters reveals the hidden logic of the silent systems. Why was this alleyway so narrow yet meticulously maintained? Because it was the legally mandated right-of-way for the Gong farmer's cart, a vital artery for the city's health written not in pen but in the very shape of the streets. Finding the stone foundation of a public fountain at a major crossroads confirms its role as a social and informational hub. the place where the official and the informal whisper networks met. Each discovered wooden stave pipe, each brick-lined drain, each worn path to a communal well is a direct physical link to the people whose lives depended on this hidden machinery. They are the proof that the grand medieval kingdom, with all its castles and cathedrals, was ultimately built upon a foundation of practical, gritty, and brilliantly organized necessity.